Coming up, the Brooklyn Nets sign Jacque Vaughn to a multi-year extension. We break down why he could be the right man to lead this franchise forward and what the organization is looking to accomplish in the wake of the Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving trades.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there, you're going to find Doug Norrie, owner-operator of DFSR, for all your daily fantasy sports rankings from DraftKings to FanDuel. He's got you covered. I'm Adam Arbrecht, breaking down the New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day, free on all those great platforms, and we'll let you know. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. That's prizepicks.com, promo code Locked On. And Doug, finally, the Locked On Nets podcast catches a break around when we record episodes and actually getting news from the Brooklyn Nets. Jacque Vaughn signed to the extension. Just the initial reaction to what feels like this gradual distancing from the superstar era for Nets.
Yeah, I think that, there was no real rumblings about this, but it's one of those not surprised at all when you see it, right? When it gets reported that this is the move that the Nets are going to make, that they're going to sign him to a multi-year deal. I don't believe at the time of this recording they have specified how many years that is. You can correct me if I'm wrong. I looked, it just seemed to be reported that they're inked or going to ink a multi-year deal. So we'll have that news probably pretty shortly, but for the time being, we know it's going to be, at least a couple of seasons here, a few seasons beyond this one. He was already contracted for next season, but it looks like they're making him at least like the coach for the foreseeable future. Not surprised at all. We can talk about what the positives and negatives of a move like this are, but I agree with you that this move for sure, this is the signal of moving on here, right? Like we're moving on, and stability too, right? Like it's not even so much moving on because like he's been the coach here and he was the coach as part of that era, but no one's going to think of him as that, right? Like when the history of the Nets is written here, and we do the oral history of these last few seasons, which have been head scratching and infuriating at times. I don't think Jacque Vaughn, even though he overlapped here with KD and Kyrie, I don't think he'll be associated with this timeline at all, right? I think that's going to be Atkinson, and then what Atkinson's dismissal meant, and then bringing in Steve Nash. I think those are going to be the names that are associated with this timeline. It will not be Jacque.
Yeah, and he's the guy that when Atkinson was dismissed, then they went ahead and gave him a sizable pay bump to stay on the staff there with Steve Nash. Even when he got the extension through next season, as you mentioned, I think at the time, with Kevin Durant still here, with Kyrie still here, was, well, that's a reward for a guy that has really towed the company line and just done what's been asked of him. And he said as much in a lot of his press conferences leading up to that, but it doesn't mean that he's here long term. This could always change because that's what felt like what was happening with the superstars. Hey, this is a minute-to-minute evolving situation in Brooklyn. Now, though, with the multi-year extension, it does feel like the Brooklyn Nets are trying to get back to a place where, remember, pre-superstars, this was an organization that was regarded as one of the most stable franchises in the league, one of the most well-run organizations in the league, right? Top to bottom. That's how they were looked at. It's how they got the superstars. And everything since that moment has slowly chipped away at that facade. I want to hit the couple of quotes here from Sean Marks on Jacque Vaughn. And then later on in this episode, we can also reflect on what this means for Sean Marks, because a lot of Nets fans have talked about the end of the superstar era and what that should mean organizationally. We have a pretty clear, at least I think, indication of what this looks like going forward. But Sean Marks on Jacque Vaughn. Jacque has made an immediate and immeasurable impact on our organization since assuming the role of head coach earlier this season. Went on to say, we are thrilled to have Jacque leading the Nets for years to come. And in addition to that, I did also just find here, as I'll certainly not lose it in the moment, He also communicated on the court. He's clearly demonstrated his leadership through his ability to connect and communicate at a very high level while displaying tremendous instincts for the game. Also from Sean Marks there as well. I mean, it's universal praise. And on a game-to-game basis, you and I have talked about X's and O's and decisions, but at a high level, Jacque Vaughn has been such a night and day from what Steve Nash was bringing to the table at the head coach that this does feel right to me. Like, it does make sense that you now reward someone and say, you have the runway to build your own resume as the coach of the Nets, which very much was still in tandem with the superstars. Now you're the leader of this team, and the players are there to be molded by you as opposed to maybe the other way around.
Yeah, look, this was a situation where he's come in. His record since taking over Steve Nash is 32-19. Now some of that is, and there was turmoil during this time. Remember too. I mean, there was times where it looked really, really good. Kyrie. This was, coincided at times with the Kyrie situation earlier in the season. It went through trade demands. I mean, it went through trades. I mean, there's other stuff. The Katie injury. I mean, there's a lot of other stuff that's in this record that's just easier than just, that you have to kind of dive into to kind of tell the whole story of what it's been. But and I want to talk a little bit about like some of the differences between him and Nash and probably what it means going forward. But I will say, just from like a steady hand point of view, like the Nets clearly need a steady hand here. Like this is a situation where they have been through such great upheaval over these last few seasons, even when the guys have been there, like Durant and Kyrie. It's been a mess. It's been a mess, like from an organizational standpoint. And we don't need to relitigate every single thing that's happened or go back through the timeline. Nets fans, as we all know exactly what this is, right? We know what these last few years have been. It's been an absolute laundry list of things that have gone wrong. Like it's comical, really. It's like, it's unbelievable. One thing about Vaughn, you can definitely say, is he's a pretty cerebral dude, and he doesn't seem like flappable, right? Like, and you see that in the quotes, you see that in the very thoughtful ways that he presents things. Even difficult information is presented in a very, like, not philosophical, but thought out way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think, like, for this team, they desperately have needed that. And they are going to need it going forward too. And there had to be some kind of signal that, like, yeah, a lot of things have changed around here, but we've identified someone that we like and respect, and he does a good job on the things that we need to have done really well right now. And Vaughn has clearly shown the ability to do those things, right? And like to control the narrative, to give thought out answers, to not have it seem like we're just throwing things against the wall, see what sticks, even though the coaching decisions can sometimes feel like that, which we'll get to in a sec. But like, that's not what the facade here is. And so I think from that standpoint, I think that this really pretty clearly feels like the right thing. I want to get more into this because I want to get your opinion on like sort of like what you said about where it signals about Sean Marks too, because I think that's an interesting piece for us to get into. We're going to get into that in a second. First, I'm going to tell you about our friends over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. All you're doing on Prize Picks, look, they figured this out, folks. You have to get over on Prize Picks. I'm telling you, like, gone are the days, no salary caps, no sharks in the water. It's just you versus the player projections. You're making entries. You're going more or less on the different stuff just in time for NBA action to return on Thursday as well. Maybe you're thinking like Tatum's going to go off. Prize Picks right now, you can get Tatum more than 29.5 points versus that fast-paced Pacers team. I don't mind that. Maybe you think it's going to be a shootout. You want to go more on Tyrese Halliburton, 19.5 coming off that, I thought, pretty strong overall 3-point contest performance by him. Prize Picks has figured all of this stuff out. You pick 2 to 6 players. You figure out if they're going to go more or less in their Prize Picks projections, not just points either. It's rebounds, assists, every sport too. I mean, they got basically everything you can imagine. You can win up to 25 times your money on any entry. You're not competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. Everything available here. NBA, MLB right around the corner, NHL. I saw some CSGO up there. I mean, really, honestly, anything you can think of is over on Prize Picks. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. Super safe and fast withdrawals. Download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up to play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code LOCKEDON. If you deposit $100, Prize Picks will give you $100. Deposit $50, they'll give you $50. You can figure out all the other iterations. Don't forget to enter the promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy.
All right, so let's touch on, because we can contrast also what Jacque Vaughn means as a head coach. But since I brought up such a good point in the first segment, we might as well dive into it. The Sean Marks piece of this, I think that at the time of the Kyrie Irving trade, the way, and by the way, some of the fan base reacted this way. I had a great conversation with the Talking Nets guys, Robin Lundberg and Keith McPherson and Hudson Flynn. And I think that they represented a different perspective where it was, guess what? The superstars absolutely ruined this in a lot of different ways, and we're glad that they're gone. So I do think it's like a good reminder that different segments of the fan base feel differently about how things went for the Brooklyn Nets and who's responsible for it. But a big talking point coming out of it, at least from a lot of fans we heard, was, well, if you're going to lose the superstars, next phase is Sean Marks has got to go. And frankly, if we can get Joe Tsai to sell the team, that's what we're looking for. Breaking news here. Billionaire owners do not give up their toy that they like to play with. But now this decision to extend Vaughn does feel like where my instincts were at the time. If you're going to have a guy that's going to construct a rebuild, why not the guy that's constructed a rebuild for you? And if he's making the active decision around the head coach, while things can change over the next couple of seasons, I don't think any of these guys are going anywhere anytime soon. And I've always felt that Joe Tsai and Sean Marks, right, wrong, indifferent, how you feel about decisions, were always very much on the same page. So that was never in question here. Like, I think that Sean Marks has always been fairly secure in his position as GM.
Oh, it's totally clear. I mean, like, look, think back to the summer, and this goes along with the Vaughn piece too, because it's just like an organizational hierarchy kind of idea. But, and I want to get to some decision making stuff on Vaughn for sure. But when it goes to Sean Marks and the signal that this sends around the organization going forward, like, we pretty much knew that his job was safe from the second that KD essentially gave the ultimatum around, hey, it's Marks and Nash or me, right? That was sort of how the summer thing started. And then they kind of, got around the campfire and decided that it was going to be okay for a little bit until it wasn't. They had kind of an organizational choice at that point to move on from Marks. And it was like so clear that they were not going to do that. And then there was a round two with it where Katie reaffirms the trade demands this time around, where there was probably if they were going to do it, one last chance to move on from Marks in an effort to save KD, and they didn't do it. So I think from that standpoint, just that, not often can you point to single transactions as a way to decide whether or not there's stability for a guy. But I think that those did, because KD was kind of clear. It's like, hey, it's him or me. Right. Like, and they were like, cool, it's you, see ya. Right. And yeah, it's like, great, thanks for that. Made it. And whether that's the right decision or not, look, we were adamant. I was at least adamant at the time. I said I would choose KD right now. I'm not sure if I've amended that line of thinking. Point being, or in totality here, with Marks, he is clearly very safe in his job. They're hiring a coach that already has like organizational buy-in around a guy that he had hired. So I think that like these all signal that no matter what you think about Mark, he's staying, right? As long as Joe Tsai is the owner here, at least for the time being, it's going to be Marks. And now it's probably going to be Marks and Jacque Vaughn. And maybe their fates are like a little tied together here. But here's the thing. If Marks made it through this reset, he's not going anywhere.
Right.
like if they're going out and hiring coaches long-term and like multi-year contracts, that's stuff you would do. You wouldn't do that if you were iffy about your GM. If you were iffy about your GM, you would not sign a coach for a long period of time, because usually you want those to kind of go hand in hand. The fact that they signed him long-term means that, like, hey, the group here is Tsai, Marks, and Jacque Vaughn, and that's the group going forward. And no matter how bad some fans want him out of here, that's just not happening. He's the guy. And I think these guys are okay for like a reset kind of narrative.
Yeah. I think this is why Men in Black, give yourself the mind erase blip and go, oh, Sean Marks is the GM orchestrating a rebuild, and Jacque Vaughn is a head coach who seems to have real buy-in and understands how to communicate and function as a coach. Yeah. Like, I think you would like that if you can separate it from the other thing. And I like it even with all of that baggage that they've gone through together. When it comes to Jacque Vaughn, then, to get back onto him, one of the things I think, if we wanted to have like, oh, what was a tea leaf around like Jacque Vaughn being here long-term, it was probably the way that he's responded to questions around Ben Simmons, right? If Ben Simmons can't figure it out, I can't do it for him. That's on him to do it. When you talk about rotations after the trades happened, hey, listen, I told the guys, you're going to have to be ready. Minutes are going to look different. Some nights you're going to get 5, some nights you're going to get 15, some nights you're going to get DNPs, but the mentality is to be ready to play. Like, and by the way, even when they had Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, that was still the way Jacque Vaughn communicated. But I do think that his mentality from the way he communicates in the media, and I'm sure it carries over into the locker room, should have really been an indication like, hey, this guy has a level of confidence. Now, that could have been bravado around, I'm playing with house money. What's the difference here? But I would assume there was some kind of behind the scenes communication between him, Sean Marks, and ownership of saying, we're putting you in place now. We believe that you can be the guy to carry this team forward, so you can communicate to the team and to the media confidently around what you want to do, so you don't end up looking in a lot of ways like Steve Nash, who was getting put in front of a microphone at times going, yeah, I don't know what's going on with James Harden. Maybe. I don't think so, but possibly. I don't know. We'll talk to me tomorrow. We'll see. Oh, sorry. I got fired. I apologize.
There is a pretty start. I mean, it is hilarious to have dealt with the Nash part of it. And I think in a lot of ways, Nash got treated unfairly here a little bit. I also not sure Nash did himself any favors with some of this stuff either. No. Like in terms of just maybe not demanding more information and be like, hey man, I can't just toe the company line here over and over again. Like I got to know something. And it's a totally ridiculous situation. I'm not sure everyone would have put up with that. Vaughn is a clear, there's a clear difference in his approach. And I think that also what you said around some of the comments that he was making in confidence around the rotations and confidence when it came to Ben Simmons, I don't think that was like throwing him under Simmons or anybody under the bus. I was just like, hey, this is how I operate. This is how the team is going to operate. Everyone's kind of on the same level here, like money aside, there's nothing else is going to get you on the court. Like if you want to be on the court, you have to perform up to certain like expectations and you're a professional and you got to do some of these things. And I think that like, I wonder if like some of those quotes were as much about, it was much about like him having confidence in the gig. And I don't even think it's like playing with house money. I think it's just that this is how he sort of operates. And by operating like that, it makes you more confident if you're an organization of maybe signing on long-term. So I'm not sure like what chicken or the egg there is, but I do know to me, it's all bundled together as one sort of personality thing.
And by the way, it was to paraphrase, it was hate me in 10 years, but appreciate what I'm doing. You know, in 10 years, you'll appreciate me, hate me now, but you're going to appreciate what I tried to do for you in the moment. That's a lot around not just Ben Simmons, but everybody. Like he's trying to make basketball players better. He's trying to make the team better. And I'm sure that his time in Orlando informs the way that he approaches this opportunity, right? Because he went through a really bad roster, a team that didn't have a lot of talent and probably took a lot of those lumps and then got to spend time with other good organizations, great organizations like the Spurs, and now finds himself in Brooklyn with a really great opportunity here. So coming up, we'll continue then to look at what this means over the remainder of this season from a Jacque Vaughn coaching standpoint and what he's going to try to determine both for himself and for the organization when it comes to all of these players. Before we do that though, Doug's going to tell you a way in which you can get yourself a baby burrito, and that's going to be from Brooklyn Borough. But I just want to let you know you can also go ahead and get yourself a baby quesadilla because little tiny bites, they're absolutely delicious. Go with the Polo Asado for me. That's the grilled chicken with Chipotle on there as well. You know the deal. Brooklyn Borough, Pepe, he's doing it for us.
Yeah, look, those are our friends over at Brooklyn Borough. It's the best Cali Mexican food in the Brooklyn area, really close to Barclays, but they're serving San Francisco Mission District burritos that are off the charts. We've been in there. We've had the food. This one's easy. Sometimes like the stuff comes along and you wonder if you're going to be able to do it. Look, Brooklyn Borough makes it so easy. The food is absolutely delicious. The vibe is completely there. Pepe and his crew have completely crushed it when it comes to really everything from the ambiance to the food to the menu. Oh, the salsa bar as well. They got their cervezas, margaritas, everything you want is over at Brooklyn Borough. The house-made chips and salsa are ready to go. Like I said, they have the ice-cold cervezas. It's fair and affordable pricing, super great value. And here's the value that you're going to get as Locked On Nets fans. You're going to go over to 922 Fulton Street. You're going to go up and you're going to order your food. You're going to order a Mission Burrito. And then you're going to say you're a Locked On Nets fan, and you're going to get a free baby burrito. That is not a deal that you can pass up. 922 Fulton Street, Brooklyn Borough. You order a Mission Burrito. You say Locked On. Just scream out Locked On Nets, and they're going to start throwing baby burritos your way. It's just that easy. And you're not going to look crazy because these are Nets folks over there, folks. They got they got a Joe Harris named burrito.
Got to get a Mikal Bridges product on the menu. I think we got to talk to Pepe about that as well.
Yeah, exactly. So look, these guys get it. Go to Brooklyn Borough, 922 Fulton Street. Order, unwrap, enjoy, unwrap more, finish, come back, smile. Brooklyn Borough, 922 Fulton Street. Locked On Nets fans, free baby burrito with a purchase of a Mission Burrito.
Pepe. All right. So coming up next here, we want to dive into the conversation around what this means for the roster and going forward here, and how Jacque Vaughn, because we've talked about now some of the differences between the minutes that have been displayed here. You broke down the gluttony of talent that the Nets have and why it gets so deep. Some of these incoming players, though, I do wonder how Jacque Vaughn is going to approach evaluating the team in a long-term perspective now. I have job security, so I don't need to be making necessarily short-term decisions around definitely making the playoffs or avoiding the playing game. Now, I think that that's still seasonal goals that the Nets have, but do you think that his long-term security impacts the short-term decisions that he'll make around the roster?
Well, I think that it's good. Okay, so it's good in a couple ways, right? Because I think I totally agree with you in terms of where he is and maybe making sure that certain things aren't done incorrectly, like, going nuts on minutes and things like this, which can be problematic for guys that are trying to just job preservation, right? Self-preservation can screw you up in terms of your approach, for sure. We've seen it happen many times in the past. I don't think he was really a total candidate to make that happen, but look, we saw KD play a ton of minutes. Like we have seen some of this kind of happen this way. I think that will help in some of the evaluation. I think it'll be help to make so that his decisions kind of are my way or the highway. And I think a lot of times that is good organizational process when you're dealing with players like they have on the roster now, like maybe Simmons and some of these younger guys. Cam Thomas, we'll talk about him shortly too. But so I think from that standpoint, I think the security will probably, for this type of team, will help in evaluating prospects long term. They're in a really interesting situation, which I think we'll end up talking about more tomorrow, is that their record's kind of good and they should just keep winning games based on the way things are going here. And they're also just not a team that's going to go all the way to the championship. So they're in this weird middle ground of probably boosting player value while also not needing the tank or whatever. Yeah. And I think that that does put them in a really unique situation as compared to actually most other NBA coaches at this point. And I think that's fine. I think that they have some decisions to make on some of these guys. They have some ways that they're going to need to figure out, who can play and who can and who's part of the future and who isn't. And I think from that standpoint, he is uniquely positioned in a way that I actually probably trust him there. Probably trust him there more than anything else, honestly. Just in terms of having, and again, it goes back to the steady hand. It's I just think that that's the kind of guy you want in this position. NBA lifer, has respect, is thoughtful, will not, cave to different personalities. On this particular team, I think that's actually a pretty important guy to have.
Yeah, it's not funny. I sometimes phrase things as, yeah, it's funny, but picture Steve Nash still being the head coach and the stars get traded away and Steve Nash is still in charge. And we highlighted all the mistakes that he made for himself, regardless of what was going on around him. I always wondered, we remember the stretches where KD was out and he played with a lot of the backup players and things did look different. Rotations look different. Maybe some of the schemes actually looked like they were being carried out. But I would have been hard pressed to say, wow, Steve Nash leading this brigade forward to try to secure that playoff position and try to continue to evaluate talent. That may be unfair to Steve Nash, but I do think that even record aside, the resume of, you said, NBA lifer Jacque Vaughn makes a massive difference to thinking we can continue to evaluate our team and roster going forward without a concern that the area you don't have hands on, if you're Sean Marks, if you're Joe Tsai, is in the locker room, on the practice court, right? They're not going down there and saying, hey, I don't love the schemes you're running here. That's up to the coach. And in that sense, you could be talking about even just the back end 24 games of this season and saying, we don't know. We could actually be hurting our asset value. We could be hurting the development of certain players. That has to be greatly reduced when it comes to Jacque Vaughn. And it'll be fun. I think for me, it'll be, I'm going to love hearing the quotes, by the way, from Jacque Vaughn about this. When he gets, Friday night, first game back after All-Star break, he gave that great, how'd the turtle get up on the fence? We didn't do it by himself. There's got to be something. He's got to give us a juicy nugget on the way out the door here around now being a long-term head coach for Brooklyn.
And just around and I agree with you. I love the absolute deadpan eye contact too with like the sideline people. That is the absolute best. Like he's unmatched when it comes to
There is a
sideline
little bit of like
interviews.
stand-up comedy to his press conferences where like he waits the beat. You getting it? Nah, don't worry about it.
Stand next to Jared Greenberg on the court and just staring right through him with a thoughtful answer. So two things real quick before we get out the door about like I'm going to give a plus here and a minus here for Jacque, and this is like a little X's and O's, but not really. So the plus is one thing you like to see, and just from the short term, right, is that if you think back just over the Nets' last two games, in terms of just what happened when they played, or excuse me, I'll go with the last three games when they played Philadelphia and then they played New York and then they played Miami. We saw like already a clear shift in hierarchy in terms of like how they were going to handle some of the scoring load, right? Like some of that is coaching. It's like, hey, these sets were not working. These like Dinwiddie kind of sets are not working as much. We're going to run things more through Mikal, like, and we're going to see how that goes. I do like to see that. That's like, that is coaching. Like that is a clear shift in approach, it was so clear. They had a totally different approach against Miami and they won, and Bridges turned in a career performance. That is what you like to see for people that want to say, well, they don't do anything new. Well, they did do something new. They did something totally different game over game, and it worked. Now, I will give a negative here. A negative I would say is I'm still confused about like what happens with Cam Thomas, right? Like now this is still the guy who had Cam Thomas totally buried, then had Cam Thomas go off and score every point that's ever been created in the NBA, and then kind of go back to like being mini buried again, right? So right. I do wonder sometimes around stuff like that, because you can't give him full great evaluative like props if you think that and maybe it depends on your opinion of Cam, but like I do wonder about stuff like that, because I think that kind of like counts against the resume a little bit too, but there also might be stuff we don't know behind the scenes. So I'm not exactly sure because it's been alluded to. So this isn't like full praise for Jacque Vaughn. I think there are situations where it hasn't looked totally right, or there's been a little head scratching. But just on a high level, I still agree with it. Does that make sense? Like I'm trying to just pick I'm trying to pick two examples that maybe like work in contrast to each other.
Oh yeah, still evaluation. Like, by the way, this isn't like Hall of Fame coach Jacque Vaughn. I think if anything, it's good for Jacque Vaughn. And to me, it's more indicative of where is the organization right now. I like stable organizations. And this is an indication that the GM isn't going anywhere. The head coach isn't going anywhere. And that means that we can be a little more critical in our evaluation and what we want to see the team doing over the remainder of the season and going forward. So it's all good. And it all still remains open-ended. And that's the nature of I was going to say sports, but definitely the nature of the Brooklyn Nets.
Yeah. All right. So we'll be back again tomorrow. We're going to talk before we get back from the All-Star break. We're going to talk a little bit about like what our feelings are going forward for the rest of the season, like what sort of to expect from the squad. There's really not that many games left. The NBA All-Star game will really throw you off here because you're like, midway point. No, folks. That was like the 2/3 of the way point. We do not have very much time left in the NBA season. We're going to break down tomorrow what to kind of expect over this last little stretch of games, and hopefully the playoffs. We'll be doing that tomorrow. Appreciate everyone jumping in over on YouTube, seeing those numbers continue to climb. If you're over on the podcast, make sure you subscribe to YouTube. If you're over on YouTube, make sure you subscribe to the podcast. Give some, take some. That's how we're going to make it work. We all, same people can help us in both places. So make sure you subscribe to Locked On Nets wherever you listen to the podcast.
Yeah, as the All-Star break approached, you could have heard me saying, now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to go on an overnight drunk, and in 10 days' time, I'll set out to find the shark that ate my friend and destroy it. Anyone who wants to tag along is more than welcome. That's Steve Zissou from Life Aquatic.
Oh, one of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.